Hi, I'm Jonny Clarck. I am convener of ywam in Ireland and also of ywam in this kind of Wales, Ireland, Scotland, England area with a small team of others. It's really good to kind of have 10 minutes to talk about the new normal that we're in as ywam in this world at the moment. We're 6 months into a pandemic. We're not sure how long it's going to go on for. What are the signposts? What's the kind of core attributes that we need to carry with us in this next season? I want to talk about 3 words that I think we need to be walking with in this next period of time. 3 words: innovation, compassion, and passion. When I was thinking about doing a talk that kind of helps us to kind of walk through this season, I was reminded of when I went up to Belfast in 2002 to pioneer a new team. Before that, I'd been part of another base. I'd been leading some DTSs. But in 2002, I was on my own. I had a whole city to decide where to go to. I had a whole kind of a blank page to decide what kind of ministry what we were going to do, what kind of schools we were going to run. And we ended up running a 10-month DTS. We ended up kind of innovating quite a lot during that season. We started to offer scholarships to young people from areas of conflict. ywam bases back then weren't offering a whole lot of scholarships. Not that we had a lot of money, we had no money, but we just kind of were free. That was the big word that I felt. When I look back on that time, I felt free to innovate, free to do new things in new ways. And so for me, it was a really exciting time. And as I think about this season of COVID-19, the word that comes to mind is innovation, doing new things in new ways. This is actually what we're made for as ywam. It's what we're really, really good at. It's what we're naturally kind of gifted and called to, is innovation, finding new ways to do what we've always done. The reality is that sometimes in this next month or 6 months, year, we may not be able to run all the schools that we've always run. We may not be able to do the outreaches that we've always done. How are we going to make it through? So we're going to have to innovate. It's going to have to become part of who we are and what we do. The other word is compassion that comes to mind. Compassion literally from the Latin means to suffer with. But what's difficult right now is that compassion is something that normally requires us touching people, holding them, embracing them. Yet at the moment, this pandemic targets most significantly the most vulnerable and needy in our communities. And so the one thing we kind of can't do is touch people like we want to. We can't hug them like we want to. We have to figure out how to show compassion in a new way. So how are we going to do it? In history, there have been a number of Christian leaders who have reached out to those on the margins, and particularly in times of epidemic or plagues. In the last couple of 100 years, I think of George Mueller in Bristol, I think of Father Damien in Molokai in the Hawaiian Islands, who founded a leper colony. I think of Mother Teresa of Calcutta. All 3 people who, in the midst of poverty, found a way to be the hands and feet of Jesus. But of course, their presence never endangered those that they were reaching. Yet for us now in this epidemic, we can be carriers of the virus. So how do we love, how do we do outreach in a time when our presence could actually infect other people? How do we do it? We have to figure out a way. It's going to take innovation, compassion with innovation. In his book, The Rise of Christianity, Rodney Stark talked about the early Christians. It's an amazing book. He's written about 20 years ago, but it's deeply relevant for the times we're living in now. And in the book, Rodney Stark is talking about how did the kind of Roman Empire, the dominant religion of which after Jesus died was paganism. How did 3-4 centuries later we see this kind of inexorable rise of Christianity? And one of the things in his book he really highlights are these 2 major epidemics that happened in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. It's said that maybe 1/4 of the population of the Roman Empire died during that time or more. So it was a massive, massive plague, really deeply significant that resulted in the death of lots of people. And Rodney Stark says that during that time, the Christians had something very, very different. They had a deep love of their own people and a deep love for their neighbors. They really were a Jesus-looking community. He says that one of the things about those plagues was that actually with a little bit of basic nursing and food and water, people were able to survive. But of course, most people coming from a kind of pagan background, they didn't have a kind of a mindset that it would be important to kind of look after their neighbor or even look after family members. It's like people were just left to die. But in the Christian communities, nobody was left behind. The Christian communities were these small, huddled, dispersed communities of people throughout the Roman Empire. And when one of them got sick, everyone in their little huddle would come and look after them. They were never left alone. And therefore, the rates of death among Christians was significantly lower than among those of their neighbors. And of course, the Christians not only looked after themselves, they might have looked after their next door neighbor who was a pagan. And the pagan was nursed back to health and of course became a Christian. And so Rodney Stark says that, you know, and this is from a scientific, sociological kind of looking at data, the number of Christians in Europe just kept rising and rising and rising because of this relentless love of Christians for their own people and for their neighbors. Jesus said in John 17, the world will see the love you have for one another and praise your Father in heaven. That was very much lived out by the early Christians. Also in Matthew 5, Jesus says, the world will see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven. So good deeds are actually an important part of what it means to be a Christian, according to the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5, 6, and 7. Good deeds. We're to be known for our compassion. This is a season where, more than any other time, as YWAM, I think we are to be these huddled, dispersed communities of deep compassion at this time. Looking after each other, but looking after our neighbors in ways that we can. Being innovative in the midst of a pandemic and figuring out how do we show compassion when we're limited because of social distancing and all these kind of areas. The third word is passion. If compassion means to suffer with, passion means to suffer literally. Of course, in our modern kind of language, we often talk about passion. Somebody is a passionate person. It kind of implies emotion and energy. Brennan Manning is one of my favorite writers, and he was asked, what is passion? He said, passion is not an emotion. He says, you know, people think passion is, they think of King David dancing behind the ark. And he said, yeah, sure, that's passion. But he said, you know, Job lost everything he had, and he said, though you slay me, I'll still trust you, Lord. Jesus on the cross said, take this cup from me, but yet not my will, but yours be done. Brennan Manning says, passion is not an emotion. Passion is a steely determination. During this season, I think many of us as individuals and even as our teams and bases, we're going to be struggling a bit with this new normal. It's going to be hard to keep going. We're going to be questioning our calling, maybe questioning God at times. How are we going to respond? I think that this calls for unprecedented levels of steely determined commitment to the calling that God has given us. Wherever you are right now, hang in there and just keep following God, putting one step in front of the other and trusting God and that He will bring you through this season. Not only, of course, just bring you through, but for some of you, maybe there's an opportunity right now to innovate and discover new forms of ministry that you never would have found if it hadn't been for this pandemic. One of our staff, Krista Curry, she's a real great leader and a great visionary, and she was living in quarantine during the lockdown and really kind of just struggling with what to do. She realized that, you know, there wasn't much ministry right now for her to do, but she was aware of all these former trainees that we had all over the world, particularly the sponsored trainees in our focus nations. One of our big focus areas is the KwaZulu-Natal area outside Durban in South Africa. We've had about 35 Zulus come from those communities to do DTSs with us over the last 18 years. So she got in touch with them and said, can I help? And they said, many of the families of our former trainees are really struggling in dire poverty because of the virus. She arranged a fundraising campaign and raised just £3,000. She found, one of our former trainees found a supplier that could provide good food at a cheap price. And one of our other trainees, Sandile, arranged to carry the food packages to all the families. So we raised the money, we found a supplier, found a deliverer, someone who'd drive the food. And now, 2 months later, 96 families have had food packages delivered. Though each package will last about 3 to 4 months. That was something, that was innovation. It was compassionate. And the world saw what we did and was like, that's really cool that you do that. We need to show that kind of compassion in whatever we're doing. Wherever you are in the world, wherever your base and team is, think big. Think maybe outside of just Europe. Where has God called you around the world, and how can you be the hands and feet at this time? Another thing that Krista did was our border walk, this annual pilgrimage we do, a 200-mile walk of prayer and reconciliation. We carry a big cross and we walk along the border. Of course, we couldn't do it this year because of social distancing and having to keep people safe. We couldn't be basically a big march across the land bringing people to us. That would have been dangerous. So we've gone in 2 different teams of 6 people, walked along the border. And it's gone exceptionally well. And thousands of people have driven past our walkers and seen us and been just astounded by what they've seen. We've literally carried the cross across this land. Public demonstrations at this time of love, of not ostentatious kind of being showy and proud, but in humility. There's nothing like walking with a cross on your shoulders. I remember being in Armenia a couple of years ago for a European conference and going into some of these Armenian apostolic churches, these ancient churches. And most of the artwork in Armenian churches depict the cross as the tree of life. You have this kind of cross and you've got leaves coming out of it. And it's understood very much in their theology and in Christian theology that the cross is the ultimate tree of life through which we have life. The leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. Isaiah said in Isaiah 53, by his wounds we are healed. We have a message that can bring healing to the world. And we need to, as Eugene Peterson in his translation of Matthew 5 said, instead of the city on a hill can't be hidden, Eugene Peterson said, we're going public with this. This is a season for us as YWAM to go public with the message that we have, a message of compassion, a message of healing for the world. So let's do it. Let's be innovative and find new ways. Let's show compassion, and also let's hang in there and show that steely determined passion that we need to in these days. We really need to hang on to that. Don't give up. Keep going. We have a God that loves us, and we're following a Jesus who is what God has to say. We need to take that Jesus-looking message, Jesus-looking kingdom out into the world. Let's do it. Let's be innovative, let's be compassionate, and let's show deep, steely determined passion. Thanks.